We are live. Wanda, the floor is yours.
Great. Good evening and welcome to the Consent Decree Monitoring Team's Community Forum this evening, August 17, 2022. And tonight we're going to be talking about stop searches and arrests, fair and impartial policing, community policing, and sexual assault. And I am also going to be introducing our moderators who are with us this evening. We have Keith Holt with a new nonprofit, Begin Anew, as well as we have Lauren Pruitt, Lauren Pruitt Esquire, who is a staff attorney and pro bono coordinator at Free State Justice. And I'm going to be turning this over to Ken Thompson, who is the Baltimore City lead monitor for the monitoring team. And he's going to introduce our speakers for tonight. Ken, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Wanda, and good evening, everyone. Very happy to be here. We're going to try to leave as much time as we can for questions because these are some very, very important topics. And I'm really very happy and pleased to have 4 of our subject matter experts on the consent decree team. And I want them to have a sufficient opportunity to go over the subject matter that we're going to be discussing tonight. Just real briefly, I'm certain most of, not all of you know, how the consent decree came into play. I've got some feedback, I'm sorry. So let me just go through that real quick. In 2015, after Freddie Gray, as we all remember that unfortunate occurrence, then Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake asked the Department of Justice to come into the city to do an investigation. They did what's called a pattern and practice investigation. They found that the police department was engaging in a pattern and practice of unconstitutional policing. And rather than engage in a long drawn out trial, which could be 10 years from now, quite frankly, the parties being the city, the police department and the Department of Justice decided to try to sit down and figure out a way to resolve it. That resulted in a settlement, and that's what we call the consent decree. Now, just so everyone understands, the consent decree is designed to reform the police department. It is not, I repeat, it is not a crime strategy. It is not a crime plan. Its sole purpose is to reform the police department with the idea and the hope that we can rebuild a level of trust between the department and the community that the department is supposed to serve. Now, we have 4 topics that took place this quarter. The way we work, we meet with the judge once a month and we discuss, there's 16 big topics in the consent decree, and every month we discuss one of those topics in detail. And the quarterly hearings are designed, and the quarterly forums are designed to go over those 3 or 4 subject matters that were discussed during the last quarter. So this month we've got, as Wanda said, stop, search, and arrest, and fair and impartial policing. And you're going to hear from 2 of our really, really fabulous experts, Ron Bowman and Seth Rosenthal. We also have community policing, and you'll hear from Chuck Ramsey. And finally, sexual assault investigations from Nola Joy. So without any further ado, let me start with you, T. Theron Bowman is called T. I'd ask you to go a little bit and discuss a little bit about stop, search, and arrest. Excuse me.
All right, great, Ken, and to this illustrious panel of folks, thank you for the opportunity. I'll be very brief this evening and hope to have another opportunity to come before the public and talk even more about stop, searches, and arrests. But my primary responsibility on our team is to look at BPD policy, but also to monitor stop, searches, and arrests. Now, for members of the public, when we talk about police departments and police officers conducting stops, what we mean is where police officers actually stop vehicles or stop pedestrians for some law enforcement purpose. Now, we know that the law authorizes the police to stop a car or stop a person if they believe a crime has occurred or is occurring or is about to occur, or if under some voluntary conditions, they just want to talk to the person and the person knows that he or she is free to leave. A police officer can stop them and ask them their name or whatever. The consent decree is concerned about stops and under what circumstances BPD is stopping people in the community. And us as monitors have the responsibility of understanding the situation and circumstances behind those stops. Now, we know from the law that when a stop of a car or a person is conducted, that stop of a person has to be a victim or somebody that the officer reasonably believe is a victim, is a suspect, or is a witness to a crime. And the officer conducting the stop has to have what the law calls reasonable articulable suspicion that a crime has occurred and that somebody, some kind of way, as a victim or a suspect or witness is involved in that crime. The monitoring team and the community as well has to understand that when stops are conducted, the reason the officer conducted the stop or made the stop fits within what the law allows the reasons to be. We cannot possibly be with every BPD officer who conduct a stop. We cannot possibly see every stop that's conducted, but yet we are on the monitoring team responsible for understanding the constitutionality of those stops. So how do we do that? Well, in order to understand what the officer is thinking when he or she makes the stop, the reason and the purpose for the stop, and whether or not the stop really fits the consent decree requirements, we have to be able to look at records that the officer create, records that the BPD creates. We have to be able to see body-worn camera video. We have to understand the experience of people who are actually being stopped by the officers and any records that are created that kind of way. But we also have to be able to assess what we call stop data. The data that is recorded whenever a stop is made, what the officer notes, what the department captures. We have to be able to look at it and from that data discern why the officers conducted the stop, what the purpose of the stop was, when it occurred, who was stopped, what the characteristics of the person stopped are, and then whether or not it's legitimate and how long it lasted. We can really only do that since we can't be present for every stop. We can only do it by looking at the data that's recorded. Now, one of the really high hurdles that we had as a monitoring team to overcome in BPD as an organization was when we came into BPD to look at stops and searches and arrests. We found that the department did not have a good record keeping system, that the record keeping system was mostly manual. They had no way of knowing just how many stops they were conducted, nor the characteristics of all of those stops that I just mentioned. And so the judge and the court and the consent decree mandated that the department take immediate steps to better understand the nature of the stops, what's being recorded, and the constitutionality thereof. In order to do that, the department had to immediately invest in technology where officers could record stop information, could put data into what we call a records management system. And the system had to be robust enough where the police managers and supervisors, where the monitoring team and others could retrieve data from the system and understand everything there that we should know about the dozens of stops that occur every day, the hundreds that occur every week, and the thousands that occur every month. And so the department has invested in a new records management system to allow that data to be captured. Much of the last year and a half to 2 years has been spent putting that system in and checking the system to make sure that it's able to capture the data, training the officers to make sure that they understand what data to record into the system, how that data is captured, and how that data is analyzed, and then making tweaks and adjustments in the system itself so that we can clearly retrieve and assess the data that's in the system. We are now in August of 2022. We're in a place where the system is almost perfected to the point where it's capturing the right data, and we're able to assess it. It's not there yet, but we've gone from a very manual record keeping system where the city had no idea, through setting policies, creating training all of the officers on the system and the policies, and now perfecting the system where we can make the proper assessments and know the who, what, when, where, and how of the stops. Stops are important because it's one of the primary tools that police departments use to look for and to record and fight crime. But it's also one of the more intrusive areas of police community interaction. The consent decree holds it in great importance. And my job, again, as a monitor, is to make sure that I understand, that the team understands the nature of those stops, and we're able to report the BPD's advances in following the constitutional muster in making sure the stops occur. So, Ken, that's all I'm going to say. I know we're limited on time right now. I'll throw it back to you.
Thank you, T. Seth, you want to add anything with respect to fair and impartial policing, since there is a strong relationship between the two?
Sure. I mean, I'll just say that, we tackled policies on fair and impartial policing early on in the consent decree process. There is a policy on fair and impartial policing. There is a policy on interactions with LGBTQ individuals that were finalized in early 2020 and went live after training on those policies in early 2021. So probably more than a year and a half ago now. So those policies are live and on the street. When it comes to assessing, whether there is discrimination in stops, searches, and arrests, as T was just saying, that's something that, we will be taking a look at as the record management system, as the data system that T was just talking about is further refined. As it stands now, we are able, and we are currently in the process of taking a look at trends by race in arrests in the years of 2019 and 2021. And the reason we picked those 2 years for arrests is because 2019 is before the implementation of the new policies on stops, searches, and arrests and fair and impartial policing, and before the training on those policies. And 2021 is the first full year after the implementation of those policies. So we want to see whether there's a change. Now, of course, with arrests, we're not just looking at, whether there is a disproportionate number of Black people being stopped or a disproportionate number of Hispanic people being stopped, as was the case when the Department of Justice did its investigation. We're also taking a look simply at the constitutionality writ large of those arrests, meaning did officers have probable cause or not when they made arrests? And that goes back to the area T was just talking about. With respect to stops and searches, as distinguished from arrests, traffic stops, pedestrian stops, and searches, which include full-blown searches as well as weapons pat-downs, that's the kind of assessment that we're going to be doing in the coming months once the data is sufficiently robust, sufficiently comprehensive, and sufficiently accurate to conduct those assessments. And we're working with BPD, as is the Department of Justice, as T said, to make sure that the record management system is capturing all that data in the way it should.
Thank you, Seth. Chuck, let's talk a little bit about community policing, because again, that is a very significant thread to the overall reform process, and it really encapsulates a lot of the things that both Seth and T have talked about. So let me turn the floor over to you, Chuck.
Thank you. And good evening, everyone. And you're absolutely right. This is one of the most critical areas of the consent decree: community policing and community engagement. Many of you know that last year, the BPD began its training in this area of community policing. That actually, that training was well received based on the reviews by the police officers that took a survey after the training. It included topics like the history of policing in Baltimore, problem solving. It gave officers a sense of what community policing not only is, but also how to implement it. In other words, how to operationalize it, how to make it happen. And that's a very important part of the entire picture. The BPD just recently submitted its community policing plan to the court. It was approved by both the monitoring team and DOJ. That is a requirement every year. They have to present an annual report based on what they did the previous year and what they plan to do in the future. We are now looking at the curriculum, the training curriculum. They are required by consent decree to provide 8 hours of community policing training each year. They're in the final stages of that particular draft of curriculum for the current training that will begin this fall into next year. The biggest challenge right now with community policing is staffing. The staffing levels in the BPD are of great concern to all of us. That is something that we have to take into consideration when it comes to implementing, particularly a strategy like community policing, when officers have to have some time available in order to engage with the community and engage in proactive problem solving. Right now, many officers in patrol, especially in some of the busier districts, are really tied to the radio and don't have as much time, 40%, which is the goal that was set for free time to engage in problem solving and community policing type activities. We have a long way to go before we get to that particular level across the board, and it's due to staffing. But the department is continuing to move forward. They are going to continue to provide the training and implement community policing to the extent they can. And we're at a point now in as a monitoring team where we're going to begin assessing what they're actually doing. And that includes assessing problem solving, assessing community engagement, all those kinds of things that are critically important. We're past the stage now of developing policy and even, training to a large extent. They are developing their own training. We provide some input into that and certainly make some recommendations, but it's time for them to really take off, and we have a chance to really assess to make sure that they are coming into compliance with the provisions within the consent decree. So with that, I know that we want to leave enough time, and we still have a pretty meaty topic of sexual assault coming up. So I'll turn it back over to you, Ken.
Thank you, Chuck. And Noel, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about sexual assault. I mean, obviously, I'm going to go from the general now to the specific, because this is one of those areas that for so many years, investigations were not done correctly. There was a lot of victim blaming in the old days, so to speak. And now there is a focus more on trauma-informed investigations, et cetera. So I think this is a great time and a great chance for you to discuss with the public what you've seen in terms of improvements or lack of improvements in BPD. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Ken. And yes, this is an important and critical topic. And I think what you will hear, what you have heard across all the topics tonight, is although the topics are different, the process is very similar. And so I started this work with the Baltimore Police Department back in right after the consent decree was signed. And the work we started was developing a good foundational policy for the sexual assault investigations. And that's policy 708. I'm going to, throughout this, give you some policy numbers. You can find these policies on the Baltimore Police Department website under their transparency page. If you haven't looked at them and you really want to know what officers and supervisors are supposed to be doing, go to the policy and that will tell you what they're supposed to be doing. Now, the training is after the policy is developed and set, the training happens next. And the training is intended to help operationalize or translate the policy into action. And that's training not just for, in my case, for investigators and detectives, but also police officers who are the first responders to a sexual assault call and their supervisors. And so once the policy's been established, the training has been provided, the supervisors have been informed and understood and understand what's expected of their subordinates and of themselves, then our next step is to put in place means to assess whether or not the behavior has actually changed in accordance to that policy and training. And so here in the area of sexual assault, we are past the policy. They have received 2 years of really good in-service training. Frankly, I think it's probably among the best I've seen in sexual assault area. And we're working on the 3rd year of in-service training. And this is not just training for the investigators. It's also training for the police officers as they respond to that call for service. And so right now we're in the process of wrapping up. I think we have a handful of cases yet to be reviewed in terms of completing the data collection to assess whether or not the policy and training that we've put down actually is being used by investigators and supervisors. We are looking at years of 2018, 2019, and 2020. And we randomly drew cases out of 2018 and 2019 and the first half of 2020. And all of the cases that the detectives investigated in the last 2 months of 2020. And the reason for that is that by that time, every investigator detective had received not only the policy, the SOP or the standard operating procedures, and the training. So we would expect and hope to see that the cases in the last half of 2020 were better, improved over the cases happening in 2018 and 2019, in which the policy was still being developed and the training was still being provided. In total, we'll look at 149 cases, sexual assault cases that were investigated by detectives. And we, like I said, we're in the end of collecting all that data. I've done some of those reviews and assessment, and what that consists of is that we have full access to the case file. We have video of victim interviews, witness interviews, and the suspect interviews. In the majority of cases, there will be cases for a variety of different reasons where not all interviews were available. I mean, all interviews were videotaped and made available to us, but in the vast majority they were. And really what we're looking for as we assess these cases is again, whether or not the policy that says that the investigator should be aware of how sexual assault impacts and is traumatic and impacts the victim's memory and the way he or she may convey that assault, and whether or not that detective understands trauma-informed interviewing, and whether the investigator is really being offender-oriented. And by that we mean they're not asking the victim, why did you do that? they're understanding from the victim's storytelling, and I use that term in a very general term, in that she or he is telling their story of how this terrible event happened to them and what they experienced, with very little interruption by the detective. And that detective is listening for all the details possible. And then his attention or her attention is focused on locating, identifying, and hopefully interviewing the possible suspect involved in this. So offender oriented, but victim centered, and that it's around making sure the victim is supported, is cared, and is treated in a very respectful way. And so we devised an instrument, a data collection instrument, in a way to kind of collect and identify whether those concepts and principles were actually being used by investigators. We expect to have a draft of the report by October of this year. And we expect to be able to file a final report to the court by 2022. And what this report will tell us, hopefully, is where Baltimore Police Department started from, the baseline of 2018 and 2019, and what progress, if any, they've made in the year of 2020. Now, this is not just a one-shot deal. We'll come back and do another assessment to monitor and assess whether progress is being made and really changing the behavior and the way officers and detectives handle sexual assault crimes. And I also just want to bring to your attention two other policies. Seth mentioned the policy on interactions with the LGBTQ individuals. That policy number is 720. Again, it's on their website if you haven't seen it and would like to see more details about that. And finally, there's a policy number 322. That policy is about member-involved sexual misconduct. And this again lays out what happens. I mean, first, very clear expectations about all members' behavior. And what is sexual misconduct. It's very well defined. Examples are provided. And then it lays out the process by which, if charges is brought against a member about concerning sexual misconduct, if it raises to a crime, it's investigated by the SOU detectives, and it's also investigated by the Internal Affairs Unit. So those are three policies. Again, if you haven't had a chance to look at it and you're interested, please do so. Policy 322 is going to be re-looked at this year, and in fact will be available for public comment October 1st through the 31st. So again, if that's an area that you want to know more about and wish to provide some comments to BPD about the policy, that's going to happen October 1st to the 31st of this year. So in terms of what we are concerned about at the moment, again, common themes. The Baltimore Police Department is looking at a new case management system. Those of you that know Lotus Notes, remember Lotus Notes, talk about aging myself, right? Well, that's what detectives currently have to use to keep their case notes, which is, well, anyway, so we're going to they're going to a new case management system. And so we're going to make sure as best we can that it reflects the demands and the requirements of the consent decree. And as with community policing, staffing is an issue. Right now, there's about 19 detectives and 9 civilians in the sex offense unit. And unfortunately, what that translates to is that each detective could have a caseload of about 15. And what's considered good would be about a caseload of 8. So staffing is also concerned here. So I'm going to stop, Ken. Hopefully we have a good enough time to have questions and answers.
So thank you, Nola. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, T and Seth. Wanda and Keith and Lauren, let's take some questions. We have a good group with us. We have some great experts, and I think we ought to take advantage of their presence here tonight.
Great. Thank you. Miller, do you have any questions from our audience yet? This would be a good time to.
I actually see
get
one
those.
that
Okay.
showed up on Facebook. One question that came up is, do we have any data to prove that there are improvement in stops, et cetera, for our minority groups?
I want to repeat
Okay,
that.
Ian, Seth?
The question was, do we have any data to prove that there's an improvement in stops regarding minority groups?
Yeah, this is T. I'll respond to that right quick. A lot of what I just talked about is the process of building a system where we can record and then analyze the data. Now, we were able to early on initially see some information on stops and searches and arrests, but it was recorded manually. It was old information, and there's no way to, we're certain that the initial data set that we saw was not complete. And so if we don't have access to the whole data set or all of the records, then what we measure isn't an accurate depiction of what's happening throughout the entire department. So the process of acquiring a new records management system has been to provide BPD with both the capability and the responsibility for recording all of the stops. They have a policy that require that officers record a lot of information from every stop that they make, that they submit that information into the new records management system, and that information is assessed on an ongoing basis. The system isn't yet complete. As Seth indicated earlier, the bugs are being worked out so that we can be assured that the information is going in and that we're assessing, or what we're able to assess is accurate information coming out of the system as well. So we don't know yet. So far, we're unable to conclusively determine the ratio or percentages of people by race, by ethnicity, by gender, what those stops percentages are. But we can, we can tell you that it's going to be important when that capability is derived and that we start taking advantage of it, that we be objective in understanding what the data says. Just because the population is one thing, it says one number, it doesn't mean that those who are subject to being stopped by Baltimore police officers are reflective of the entire Baltimore population. I think arguably more people driving cars are stopped than people who don't drive. And so we have to make sure that we have all of the data, that we're able to assess the data and that we can report it as we accurately assess it. And when we push these reports out, we'll try and make some sense so that you and other members of the public will be able to take it and understand the significance of any disparities that the data tend to display. Seth, anything more on that?
Yeah, I just want to add one wrinkle to that thorough explanation, T. There is at least some indication that things are improving. And so let me sort of take you back to the beginning. Back in the old days, from 2010 to 2015, according to the Justice Department's investigation, officers were arresting and locking up. So this is not just stopping people on the street and not searching them. It's actually when people are getting arrested. We're arresting upwards of 2,000 to 2,500 people each year who, when they were taken to central booking, the prosecutor said, this is not a good arrest. And they were basically letting them go at the door, meaning that they weren't even getting booked. Okay. So that was a sign that BPD at that point in time during those years was indiscriminately arresting a number of people without adequate justification, adequate legal justification. And what the Department of Justice's investigation showed, as we all know, is that the vast majority of those individuals were Black, right? So now what BPD has been doing under the consent decree is looking at that same subset of arrests, which are called release without charge or RWalk arrests. Arrests when people are taken down to the jail and the duty prosecutor at the jail says, this arrest isn't going to cut it, and they turn the people loose. Just in the last year and a half, the number of RWalk arrests has declined precipitously. Even more importantly, the percentage of RWalk arrests as compared to arrests overall has declined precipitously, which means that officers are doing a better job, at least given that RWalk arrests are at least a proxy for arrests that are no good. Officers are now doing a much, much better job of exercising their discretion to make good arrests. And what that means, we think, is that there are a lot fewer minorities being unjustifiably arrested now than there were at the beginning of the consent decree. And again, just to sort of take you a little deeper into the numbers, the first quarter, the first 3-month period when they did this analysis, I think was the first quarter of 2021, and something like 5%, I don't have the exact figure, but something like 5% of all arrests were RWalk arrests. And during that 3-month period, there were something like 170 RWalk arrests, which is not anywhere near the levels they were back in 2010 to 2015, but still not insignificant. Over the course of the last year and a half, the percentage of RWalk arrests in comparison to total arrests has gone down from 5% to less than 0.5%. And the total number of RWalk arrests has gone from about 170 per quarter to less than 15. Again, this is at least some sign, some signal that officers are exercising their law enforcement discretion to make what are good arrests now. And because the vast majority of people being arrested are minority and specifically Black, that tends to suggest that there are fewer bad arrests of Black folks than there have been historically. If there are any questions about that, I'm happy to go further into that, but I probably numbed everybody's mind with that discussion of statistics.
There's been a lot of good information tonight. And we did have another question from someone who was in the audience earlier, Buzz Merrick, and I hope he's still listening. His question is, can someone please give a layman's definition of community policing? And Chuck, this is probably something that you would be able to address. And the second part of it was that it seems to him that community members think of it as resulting in us seeing more police presence in our neighborhoods. And I have a sneaky suspicion that's not how the police define it. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I guess the easiest way to describe it would be working with partners, community, other stakeholders, that to really focus on problems of crime and disorder, other types of problems, in order to have an impact. You may not necessarily solve every problem, but you can certainly lessen the harm of the problem. Having officers assigned to the same geographical areas on a regular basis, so they get to know the problems, but more importantly, they get to know the people who live in that area and develop relationships with people in order to be more effective at their jobs and to bring a better sense of safety and security to that particular neighborhood. it's something that I think a lot of the confusion, in my mind anyway, is that it's just the way in which police services are delivered. It's a mindset for officers. We still call it community policing, and I guess it has to maintain a label of some kind. I like to think of it as just the way we deliver policing services, period. You know, whether you're in uniform patrol, whether you're a detective, and the way in which you handle investigations, much of which the way Nola talked about, and various other aspects of policing, everyone has a role in it, but the community has a role as well. It's not just go to a community meeting and pass along a list of complaints and then come back a month later and say, okay, what have you done? There's a role for everyone in this, okay? And so I like to describe it as almost like a sliding scale. There are going to be some problems where the majority of the work will be on the part of the police, but there are others where maybe that's not the case, where police can play certainly a role, but the community has to step up and do some things. So, and that's primarily in the area of maintaining certain areas once progress has been made to make sure the problem doesn't return. Mm-hmm. And so that's a critically important part of it as well. And so that basically is what community policing is all about. I have to say that I've been involved in community policing since the early 1990s when I was in the Chicago Police Department. And, you know, I mean, I've been around a long time, and I didn't think it held much promise, quite frankly, initially. I was very skeptical of community policing as a concept and as a way of being effective against dealing with crime. But I learned pretty quickly that that's the only way to actually police and police effectively and build relationships with the people that we serve. And so I am a huge proponent of community policing. Again, I believe it's just how we deliver policing services, no matter what your role is within a police department. And it does involve strong partnerships and relationships and collaboration with other agencies to take care of problems, whether it's the streets department or mental health or whatever that, dealing with homeless, whatever the problem is. Not everything is the responsibility directly of police. There are other agencies, but that has to be coordinated. And that's where collaboration comes in. So it's all those moving parts working together as one to make our city safer.
Great, thank you so much. Lauren, do you have any questions you'd like to ask our panel?
Yeah, so I have a question here. In regards to the new data management systems and in the recording of data, especially when dealing with stops, are we, or we being the panel here, are we comparing like body-worn cameras, like the videos, to, let's say, the officer's written record of the stops? Like, how detailed is, are we, investigating each stop, or is it just kind of what the officer has recorded in the system, and how are we defining what is constitutional and what is not?
Yeah. Lauren, so I'll take that very quickly. The short answer is yes. We're not simply looking at the report divorced from body-worn camera footage. We're looking at, the report that officers fill out, and we're looking at body-worn camera footage. So for instance, T and I and Ken, and actually Chuck as well, are deep into assessing arrests right now. Put aside stops. We're deep into assessing arrests now because the data is sufficiently robust to conduct that assessment. And so what we do for each arrest that we assess, we take a look at the statement of probable cause, which is essentially what goes into the officer's report. And then we compare it to not only the arresting officer's body-worn camera footage, but if there are other officers on the scene, we look at their body-worn camera footage as well. And so we look at all of that evidence to determine whether there's probable cause for arrest. When we get around to doing an analysis on stops, we'll do the exact same thing. We'll take a look at the officer's stop report, and then we'll take a look at their body-worn camera footage, as well as the body-worn camera footage of any other officers who are on the scene. And the way that we do that, I mean, obviously, as T said, we can't look at every single stop, right? There are too many for us to do. We'd be here forever. But we have statisticians on our team who tell us, look, given that there are X number of stops, so many stops that BPD conducts each year, if we randomly select, Y number of stops during a calendar year, we can be assured to a certain degree of statistical significance that we are capturing what we need to capture in order to comprehensively assess BPD's performance.
Okay, great. Thank you, Seth, for that. I'm going to stop us for a moment, and Mr. Holt, I'm going to ask you to give us just a 2-second spiel on your organization so people will know who you are and what you do.
Okay. Well, hello to everyone. My name is Keith Holt, and I am with Begin Anew. What Begin Anew is, it is a new nonprofit that actually hit Maryland recently, where we will use traditional and non-traditional forms of education to do a number of things in our city, such as improve self-esteem, address issues such as trauma, mental health, violence, unemployment, homelessness, things like that. So Begin Anew is actually a collaboratory project. It was founded by Dr. Sherry Holt, who has been an educator in the Baltimore system for about like 30 years. And of course, I have provided consulting for organizations around the country on how they can actually bring their services to reach the community. And I am honored to be here, and Begin Anew is honored to be a part of it, partially also because today is National Nonprofit Day. So please get to know your nonprofits in your area. I will be putting a link for Begin Anew in the chat for anyone that wants to learn more and to learn about us on National Nonprofit Day. Thank you.
Great. Attorney Pruitt, I'm going to give you the same courtesy.
Oh, yes, thank you. So Free State Justice is a social justice organization that works statewide to improve the lives of LGBTQIA+ Marylanders and their families. We provide legal services, we do policy advocacy, outreach, education, coalition building, and our work tries to bring to the forefront the experiences of those who are at greater risk of discrimination, especially youth, communities of color, individuals with low income, transgender, and gender nonconforming people. So I really appreciate the time being here, and just look forward to the great work that this committee is doing.
Okay, great. Thank you. Keith, I see you had another question for the group.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I think that, hold on, time. Okay, I was making sure I was off mute. I think that when we talk about policies and things like that, that is really, really important. Something that I've learned from just, partnering with numerous organizations and things like that, and agencies, is that when you start with policies, we have to also make sure that those policies are like trickling down to the people that are actually on the street. So when we're dealing with the LGBTQ community, lots of times that means that you also should understand the community as well. So I'm just wondering, when we start these policies and we implement these policies, are we also doing some kind of like cultural competency and things like that for the officers so that they can understand the community that the policy is written for?
Nola, you want to try that?
I'll start, and maybe Seth may have a little bit more insight on the training piece. I'm not sure. So, the department has an LB, excuse me, I'm sorry, an LGBTQ liaison officer, Verna Severin, and among her responsibilities is to ensure that there is appropriate training being provided to the officers at the academy, and to also interface between the department and the larger community there. And I believe in the recruit training, there is a good deal of discussion around not only all communities in Baltimore. When this particular policy was rolled out, policy 720, There was also training attached to that. And I believe it was, online training that was conducted, but I would have to verify that. I think that is, your question is critical. And it is definitely through training and supervision that the policy is indeed translated into the desired behavior. And so I can certainly follow up for you and report back on what I found. I don't know if Seth, if you have any additional information.
And I would appreciate that follow-up as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is T. I'll chime in right quick before Seth jump in. I think it's important to say or to remind everybody that for any policy that Baltimore has considered either writing or editing, if that policy somehow touches the consent decree, then there is a period where public comment is solicited. And so members of the public, members of the community have had an opportunity to have a say in developing all of the policies that are consent decree relevant, including the policies that NOLA has spoken of this evening. And so these policies were not just kind of blindly constructed in a dark room within the police department, but every policy now that's proposed, it's given an opportunity for BPD employees to have a say, but also it goes out to the public for public comment before that policy is finally, the comments are assimilated into the policy as appropriate, and the policy is finalized after the public has had a say. So you must know that policies that affect any community or the entire community are pushed out so that the public can have a say before they're impacted by those policies.
Okay. Seth, did you have something to add? No? Okay, great. Well, we're coming to a close. We have about 5 minutes left. Attorney Pruitt, do you have any other questions?
So following this, are there going to be like red flags that are triggered by these new systems to assist BPD and, creating, their own, way to police themselves?
Okay.
I think I think we all know the answer. It's not that we're stumped by it. I mean, I've been monopolizing the discussion, so I'm reluctant to chime in, but I guess the short answer is yes. It's one of the last things that's going to be developed because it's dependent on all of the other new IT systems that are being implemented, to include the record management system, to include the updated system that tracks uses of force and misconduct investigations called IA-Pro. But BPD is in the process of selecting a vendor to develop what's called an early intervention system. And the idea with the early intervention system is, as the name suggests, that supervisors will be able to take a look at what the EIS, the early intervention system, says about a particular officer's performance across a range of areas. What's this officer's disciplinary record? How's he performing in stop searches, or he or she is performing in stop searches and arrests? What's their track record on uses of force, right? All of those things. And the idea is that, if there are enough areas of concern, there will in fact be, the proverbial red flag that will go up that will trigger counseling for that officer before they sort of run off the rails and violate policy. So that is, BPD already has an early intervention system, but it's not anywhere near as systematized as it needs to be, and that it will be when they get this new product that the vendor is going to be developing in collaboration with them. But that's the long-term goal. Chuck, T, Ken, Nola, am I missing anything there?
No, I think you've adequately explained that. It's a tough subject.
Okay, Keith, did you have any other questions? We have about 2 minutes left. And I'm going to be wrapping it up shortly.
Well, no, basically, I would definitely like to get more information on that whole cultural competency piece, because I do believe I was in a situation not too long ago that I was working with an agency, and the heads of the agency was all on board. And the directors felt like it was really, really important. However, upon observation of the staff who did not know who I was at the time, they was actually working with the LGBT community. And when I was observing them, they had some really homophobic comments. So to me, just because the directors and the head may be on board, we also got to make sure that the body follows the head as well. So that's why I said that we need to make sure that even though it is a policy, which is great, but we need to make sure that it's going down to those that are actually working with the community to ensure that the community is being serviced correctly. So I do appreciate this conversation. I look forward to the feedback, and thank you so much on behalf of myself and Beginning New.
Great. Thank you again for participating with us, Keith and Attorney Pruitt. We appreciate having you with us. And I'd just like to remind our audience that they can reach us at bpdmonitor.com. That's our email, our website, I'm sorry. And on our website, there is a place where you can input a question or put in a comment. And everything that goes into that website is anonymous. And we also have neighborhood liaisons in each district. So you have actual live people that you can talk to. You can request it through our website. And again, I'm going to say thank you all for joining us. I thank you for our panel. And we do this quarterly. So please look out for it. And we need you to stay engaged. Thank you so much for joining us. Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening.